Okay, so then about in the late 1600s, John Locke advanced the hypothesis that people learn primarily from external forces. So there's nothing internally or in your brain that is really the starting point of learning, but rather the external stimuli, what you see outside of yourself. So if you can make some links, which theory do we think about when we think about external or stimuli or outside of ourselves? If you said behaviorism, yes, behaviorism is learning primarily from external sources, so stimuli, responding to stimuli. Okay, so further than that, he believed that the mind was like a blank tablet. Essentially, it's called a tabula rasa. They say that we're born and we don't really have any knowledge or any understanding of the world, but rather we through various experiences, that successions of simple impressions give rise to complex ideas. And so this happens through association and reflection. Things happen to us, we're associated with something, or something happens, or we've experienced something, so we reflect on that experience, and that is how we learn, and that is how we start to build up knowledge. Also, he's credited with establishing empiricism. And so, empiricism is about testing things, about as a scientific way of testing a theory to establish its validity. And so, he is really the person that, let's say, invented, or I won't say invented, but established it as a practice. And this was later used for things like research, and obviously research in the areas of social sciences and so on as well. And so Locke spoke about the fact that the mind would only really hold on to and retain what was useful knowledge, and then kind of discard what was not useful or helpful. We're going to now move on to Comenius. So John Comenius, he basically was the first person to recognize that age differences in children has an effect on the ability to learn. He noticed that children learn more effectively when they're involved with experience that they can assimilate, and assimilate is really to fit it into their lives. I want to come back to the fact that he spoke about age differences. Age differences do have an impact on what children can learn. You cannot rush a child in the process. They're an age where they're learning about maths. You can't move them to multiplication if they don't understand addition, because they are not at that point as yet. You can't expect a child, for example, to do Pythagoras if they're not at the age to really understand what Pythagoras is all about. If you think of Piaget, so we're going to draw some connections here. If you think about Piaget has different stages. We have the operational, the pre-operational, operational, concrete operational, etc. Children can only think abstractly, or individuals can only think abstractly at a certain level. So you cannot teach them abstract concepts at an age where they're only able to grasp concrete or real kind of ideas. It can't be things that they need to think about abstractly. They really can only work with things that they can see, feel, and touch. So that's why when children are quite young, they usually give them beads and counters, because this is something that they can learn their counting and they can learn their numbers on, that is more real and more concrete and something that they can see. Comenius also introduced visual aids, which is which is something that I love. Posters, models, things that children can touch and feel. And he said that you need to understand what is being taught. Children need to understand. It's not just about the memorizing things and then that is you've met the goal of teaching. No, he said that you need to have a situation where a child is exposed to something new and they really understand the concepts, understand how something works. That is learning. Memorization for him was not learning, merely just pushing information in your brain and then regurgitating it, which was not to him the goal of education. Okay, so in the mid-18th century, a French theorist named Jean-Jacques Rousseau, what a wonderful name, he put forth a new theory of educational pedagogy. So Rousseau, he had a famous work called Emile, which was published in 1762. He explained his views on the benefits of health and physical exercise. Now, if you think about this, how relevant is that in our education system? If you think of what is it called, PE or PT, The effects and the importance of physical education on the developing brain, on the developing body of a child is essential to them performing academically. If you know about gross and fine motor skills, gross motor skills help with the development of fine motor skills, and fine motor skills are used to hold a pen, to write, to draw, to read. Those are essential milestones sorry, I shouldn't say milestones. It's essential that we develop the gross motor and fine motor skills in order for us to do many of the activities required within education. So gross motor is the moving of the arms and the limbs, and that's improved by playing in the park, kicking a ball, jumping and playing. If that is worked on well enough, it will help with the development of your fine motor skills, and that is picking up the pencil, putting the beads into the bottle, tying laces, unbuttoning and buttoning your clothes. So he spoke about the fact that we need to have physical education, physical activities in our school environment, because this does help, and it's proven to help a child to perform better academically, because they need their whole body to learn. They're not just it's not just about reading or looking at a piece of paper, but actually it's about being able to do things, experience things, cut the paper, write on the board, erase, cut along a line. Those are all essential milestones for children to reach to be able to be successful in the education journey. It is so further believed that knowledge acquisition or learning things occurs through experience. So he was really about experiential learning, and that you can't just say something is a fact without proving it. So he said he encouraged reason, giving reasons for things, for investigation, for checking out something and understanding if it is valid, rather than just accepting that it is so. And he also proposed that you need to educate children according to their natural inclinations, impulses, and feelings. So if it's something that they're drawn towards, if there's something that they show a skill for, that is what you should really work on, establishing that skill for that child, or helping that child establish the skill for themselves. Rousseau was followed by Pestalozzi. He was Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi, and he is known or considered to be the first applied educational psychologist. So that was in between 1947, which wasn't obviously when he was practicing. He lived till 1827. So between that period, he was known to be the first applied educational psychologist, and he was one of the first educators who actually attempted to use Rousseau's practices and teachings and put it into to actually practice it by teaching children, by drawing upon their skills or their areas of strength, basically their natural interests and their natural abilities. And then came Herbert Spencer, and he really was an academic. And he said that we have to have a scientific study of the education process. Don't just accept it that that's how it is, but actually prove it by doing a research, understanding how things work, understanding how people are able to learn, how people are able to teach, and how best to use this knowledge to improve the education system. It's quite light, but then we move on to who is known as the father of scientific pedagogy. So essentially, he was the first scientist to distinguish instructional process from subject matter. So how we teach is different to what we are teaching. And according to him, interest develop when already strong and vivid ideas are hospitable towards new ones. So if there's a basis or foundation for something, so if you have an interest or there's an understanding of the field of mathematics, for example, it's more likely that you would develop a deeper interest in it when it's being taught, because you already have that association. Because past associations, according to him, motivate the appreciation and the development of a current skill in that specific area. Just an important point here. So, the writings of the European philosophers and the reformers, people like Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi, and also Johann Friedrich Herbert, they stressed the value of activity, so being involved. They stressed prior experience, what information and understanding do you come to the class with, and also what are your interests. And if you think about it, all of these ideas are consistent with the work in the field today, in the field of educational psychology and within the field of education as well. So it's not, these ideas are not something that happened along or were available or discussed a long time ago and kind of lost, but actually they are still filtering, and they still actually are is the foundation of where we are today. So one was what we call a Herbacean psychology. Okay, so I am not certain of how to say the surname, so I think it's Wand. He was a Herbacean psychologist, and he really wanted to extend the work of Herbert, um, and he did so by establishing a lab in 1879 and to really test the theories within Herbacean psychology. And he looked into the theory of consciousness, where he wanted to explain associations amongst the mental processes and how that develops and how that assists with learning. Then Titchener was a student of Wundt. I think it's Wundt, I think that's how you say it. He was basically the first educational psychologist to practice in America. And he really sought to focus on higher mental processes and how a concept is formed. And he argued that introspection, or looking internally, is a valid form of interpreting a great number of feelings and thoughts and ideas as well. John Dewey, on the other hand, was quite opposed to Titchener's way of thinking. He argued that the stimulus and response is essentially what we need to consider. That constitutes a reflex arc, and that is and that is how we learn, by stimulus and response. In response to the external environment, aspects of the environment is what really affects the way we do something, and then through that process we establish a purpose, because we see, okay, our environment requires us to do this, therefore we only do this to realize a purpose, to get to a goal, and that is how we decide on what we need to do and how we need to do it. Also importantly, Dewey's work led to the establishment, or gave rise to, the theory of functionalism, and functionalism encouraged developments in mental testing, investigation of individual differences, and the study of adaptive behavior. Then Thorndike, on the other hand, he also agreed with functionalism, but he was what you call a connectionist. Okay, so Edward Thorndike, he disdained what he considered to be intuitive, or basically common sense psychology. He said, no, that isn't really what is important. That's not, shouldn't be how we work. He rather agreed with functionalism, but he preferred to be identified, as I said, as a connectionist, because he wanted to explain learning in terms of a stimulus response connection. So think about behaviorism again. It should be coming back to you. He also is credited, if you also know about the behaviorist perspective, he was credited with establishing the law of effect theory, which is something that is important for you to know. And this was to account for the strengthening or weakening of connections as the result of experience. So the more experience occurs, the stronger the connection is, and vice versa, of course. In 1914, Thorndike completed the 3-volume series Educational Psychology, and that was then used for nearly 50 years, and it really embraced the theory of associationism without question. Then came cognitive psychology, which is a branch of psychology concerned with mental processes such as perception, thinking, learning, and memory, and it's really with respect to internal events occurring between sensory stimulation and the overt expression of behavior. So think about how this compares to behaviorism. What is it similar, or is it opposite? And that's something that you need to connect for yourself. And so by the 1950s, the cognitive views of learning gained real credence. Yeah, it gained quite ascendancy over the stimulus response approach. And now questions pertaining to the role of mental phenomena in learners and development were resurrected. So you can see how this journey has really been quite interesting, and various perspectives have come into play. So it's important for you to understand this, because as we progress, you'll be starting to be able to pick up the various work of the various theorists. I hope this video was helpful and takes you through the 100